Well, good evening, everyone, to Thrive's fifth Zoom presentation that collectively, and we have many more in the schedule that I'll talk to it at the end of this presentation, that all address collectively the 9 initiatives that Thrive believes that if we adapt and use in the town, it will make the town even better. It's already a great town. How do we make it better? So tonight is parks, and our speaker is Phil. And but before I start with that, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We do land acknowledgement all the time, but boy, it's so top of mind right now with the news coming out of residential schools, and it seems like every time we hear a story on that, it just gets just more awful. So so the land acknowledgement, I'd like to acknowledge that here in Amherstburg, we're located in an area that's originally inhabited by Indigenous people who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the wampum treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenni, the Lenape, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around this beautiful land. And I specifically would like to acknowledge the presence of the 3 fires, Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, Ottawatomie, and Huron-Wendat peoples. And it's easy to imagine that our Indigenous, you're not supposed to say the Indigenous peoples, used where our parks are right now to hunt, to travel through, to camp. So what better topic today than to talk about the importance of parks? A little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to, if you don't want to keep your camera on, you can keep it on or off. We're comfortable with that. We will put you on mute. We found through the other 4 that we're going to hold our questions to the end, and we'll be watching for you to, put up your hand or however you want to talk to us about a question, and we'll be happy to answer that. Okay, so our speaker tonight is Phil Roberts. You may know him as the very capable director of Parks, Recreation, and Facilities, or you may know him as the very enthusiastic champion of open air, or you may know them because you've met this really friendly guy on the street who was full of energy and excitement and positive, and it's tough to not like a contact with Phil. He is a parks expert. He had the main file on parks at the city of Windsor. He's an environmentalist. He's worked with IRCA, and he's definitely a naturalist. He's spoken twice at the River Bookshop about birding. So he's a perfect candidate for tonight's topic. And he, with his 2 years as director of Parks, Recreation, and Facilities in town, he knows this file really well. And, we've had a chance to look through it. I think it'll educate. I know it'll educate, and he's going to throw out some challenges at the end. So on that note, Phil, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Usually downtown, it's with open air, it's because I got a bit of a load on, right? So that's why I'm so friendly. I'm completely sober tonight. So, and I do want to just very quickly, if people will indulge, a very close friend of mine, an environmentalist and a local Amherstburg person, longtime Amherstburg person, Dr. John Spellman, passed this week. And John Spellman was not only a close friend, but certainly helped me understand some of the finer nuances of the dynamics of parks and protecting wetlands. John was really successful at the Ontario Municipal Board, almost without a single loss. DeCecco, the Marshfield Woods was one of the biggest cases that we worked on, finding endangered species. And just how important wetlands in green space and park space was in Amherstburg. He was absolutely voracious in that crusade. So sad loss, and I thought I would start there. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a crash course here. I actually, most of this actually comes from the Parks Master Plan that I was very fortunate to develop when I was at the city of Windsor, we developed a 20-year master plan, parks master plan. We did it all in-house. And we set up the Devonshire Mall. We set up all over the place. We got dynamics and demographics and all kinds of things. So this is kind of a crash course in parks. So Corey, if I can have the first slide. Lesson one is discretionary spending. And I know we've got a couple of counselors on right now. Great respect for counselors Reno and McCarthy and Simone. But of the $46 million that is currently in the 2021 budget for the town of Amherstburg, only 20% of it is at the discretion of council to spend. So what does that mean? So much spending, and what people don't understand is that you've got these huge budgets, but so much of it is wrapped up in mandatory spending. You have to have police, you have to have fire, you have to have community protection, you have to have planning and building, you have to, corporate services, as it relates to, the clerk's office and things like that. So all of those things gobble up a huge amount of budget. When I was at the city of Windsor, at the time, the city of Windsor's overall budget was about 888 million, and about 22% of it was at the discretion of council to spend, and about 1% of it was for parks. Next hit there, Corey. So the long and short of this presentation is that parks are 100% discretionarily funded. Nothing says council, elected officials, previous, current, or post, have to spend money on parks. It is discretionary funding. So let's keep this in mind, that this is a tight element. Next slide, Corey, please. So lesson two is the benefit of parks. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes here and just go through the benefits of parks. Go ahead, Corey. So in the environmental benefits, more and more so, parks are being relied on for their environmental benefits, cultural benefits, social and community benefits, recreational benefits, health benefits, and economic benefits. So we're going to go through each of these fairly quickly here, and because a lot of this is going to be common sense. A lot of this you're going to recognize, but this is sort of Parks Handbook 101. When we build a master plan, typically, you talk about the benefits of parks. Go ahead, Corey. So the environmental benefits. Well, the environmental benefits really are the fact that parks are huge land holdings in municipalities. And we actually have community parks, we have neighborhood parks, we have regional parks in a sense. Kings Navy Yard Park is rather regional. The Libro Center and the Libro property is rather regional. So you have all these parks, but some of these parks even have the ability to host natural features. So we've got IRCA properties, we've got Greenway Trail. So they support indigenous biodiversity. They support species at risk. They protect wetlands. A lot of the areas that we have are provincially significant wetlands, which was the Spellman Crusade always. The ability to reduce or mitigate climate change, urban heat island effect. Parks can do this rather effectively because you can green up a park. Just the physical albedo of a park makes it not only psychological cooling, but potentially going into a park that is shaded or treed or into a natural woodlot, you actually have literally degrees of temperature difference. Greenhouse gas emissions, air, water and air quality. So all of these things are environmental benefits. And we rank them pretty high now, especially with global climatic change, because it's one of the few areas that we have, not only in a built up urban area, but we also have in the rural area to continue to help promote carbon sequestering, for example. Next slide, Corey. Cultural benefits. Municipal parks are quite different than provincial parks or national parks. National parks will be protecting rather unique features, that are important to the nation. The Point Pelee Peninsula, right, and the wetland marshes, the Fort Malden, museum and the Fort Malden historical site. So provincial parks also usually unique features, right? Lady Evelyn Smoothwater, the waterfalls, all of those features that you don't want to lose. Where municipal parks tend to be based on the fact that you're providing green space for a community, but you're also providing space potentially for different cultural pockets, or you've got park space that is being dedicated, perhaps something that is locally significant. Next slide, Corey, please. The social and community benefits. First of all, parks are completely inclusive, or should be completely inclusive and accessible for all people. Parks are a great place to volunteer. Great shot I just saw recently, I think it was on Council MacArthur's blog, with all of the volunteers in front of the 320 Richmond building planting gardens there, to beautify the building from the Fort Malden Hort Society. But parks also are a place that, from a community and social standpoint, what we started to realize, and one of the key parts for this was actually a park in Windsor, which was Mitchell, where once you took out the ball diamond and the old fencing and some crappy bleachers, and you put in a pavilion and you put in a play unit, you put in walking trails, new Canadians in particular were starting to use this park. The dynamics of the park changed quickly, but the use of the park accelerated exponentially. Community garden went into that park. I'm sorry, it was Waggle Park, not Mitchell, Waggle Park. And they can promote civic pride, community pride, neighborhood pride, but also civic pride. Next slide, Corey, please. Obviously, recreational benefits. Parks, have the space and have the ability to socialize in, to have programmed recreational sports and skill building, passive, unstructured play, having a space to kick a ball around, throw a ball around, toss a frisbee around. These are really, really important. And I mean, I think at one time when we started looking at some of the use of parks, high use parks like Kings Navy Yard. Kings Navy Yard, I think, basically throughout the week is like 100 visits or 100 people an hour, and at its peak can be up to 1,000 people an hour. For things like Uncommon Fest, open air, and things like that. But there, in the Parks Master Plan, it also said, the former Centennial Park had a huge visitation. Well, it was program visitation, and it's the same thing with the Libro Center. So program visitation versus passive visitation are really two elements here that we have to look at. But from a recreational standpoint, all of them have value if you've got a place to walk, if you've got a place to play. Next slide, please, Corey. Health benefits. I'm going to sort of digress here. One of the things we discovered from the Windsor equation, and we're certainly learning it a little bit from Amherstburg, is that some of the health benefits first actually start with the huge ownership in pets, particularly dogs. What we were finding, and a lot of the comments we were getting is, I get off the couch because the dog needs to be walked. And the health benefit of being able to walk to the park, walk your dog around the park, can be enormous, right? I mean, we all know, and there's been all kinds of studies on the fact that if you're in a green environment, if you're in nature, that it reduces stress. They've equated it even adding days and hours and weeks and months to a lifespan. People with diabetes, I'm just now recently dealing with this myself, and the ability to control blood sugar without medication, based on the fact that you get in the habit of taking a walk to the park and lapping the little pathway because it's 250 meters long 4 times as a kilometer, right, as 1,000 meters, and walking home, means that you've burnt carbohydrates, you've used energy, right, which controls diabetes. So the ability to recreate, but the ability to be healthy and the personal benefits from a park standpoint cannot be dismissed. Next slide, please, Corey. And the economic benefit. So as a naturalist and an environmentalist, I've always sort of shied away from, the economic benefits. It's why I probably leave it to last. But it actually is one of the most enormous components for parks in our area as something that is non-discretionary. It is not discretionarily funded. It doesn't have to be funded. The economic benefits really are at the heart of all parks and park development. They increase revenue from businesses, and this we're experiencing this from the open air standpoint. But you get an increased revenue in business because people recreate, right, and they spend money that way. They also provide an attractive place to live, and property values around parks tend to be higher. There's a choice property market if you are living on or near a park. And the quality of your parks also makes your town, makes our area somewhat more competitive, or advances us in the competitive ranking. So next slide, I'm just going to break it down just maybe a little bit more. The problem with talking about the economy of parks is you have the tangibles, right? Those things that you can measure, but much of it, as you can see, is rather intangible and is difficult to measure. So the value-based benefits, property value, tourism, the competitiveness, right? You know, is Amherstburg going to attract more people as residents or as visitors because our park system is just that much nicer, and there's just that much more opportunity. Infrastructure, the environmental benefits, water sources, air quality, climate response, natural habitat. So many parks right now, and council I know will have or does have kind of a unique concept in front where the park actually is required for water quality and quantity issues. There's an element of stormwater retention that is required. It's becoming so much more important in our region now, especially with global climatic change. And the park's ability to, again, cool the surroundings. We're also seeing parks, and this may be something that we're even going to see in some of our urban core parks, like you know, the green space behind 320 Richmond, where that park may be required to convey stormwater because we want to develop a long-term healthcare facility next to it, and of course natural habitat. Great quote years and years ago by the director of the Department of the Interior, who basically said that there's a lot of species on the recovery list, on the endangered list, that we can't do anything in our backyard. We can't do anything in an urban park to help boost these populations, to help with that recovery of those populations. However, there are several species on those lists that you can. So the pollinators, for example, monarch butterfly. Literally, your park environment as a pollination station can be an enormous benefit. Your backyard can be an enormous benefit to supporting these species. Pretty hard for your backyard to support the recovery of bald eagle or peregrine falcon. But when it comes to a lot of these other species, aerial insect-eating birds, parks have that ability. And then, of course, quality of life. And quality of life is, you know, recreation, community wellness, all the things we just talked about. Safety is an element of a benefit. Next slide, please, Corey. So lesson 3, strategic goals. Now, I'm not going to go through the strategic goals here like I just did with the benefits of parks. I always felt the benefits of parks is somewhat important, that we realize the benefits. And, you know, we probably all understood those benefits before I communicated them. But strategic goals, this is pretty generic. So the strategic goals for parks and a park network is first and foremost accessibility and inclusivity. We want them to be accessible and inclusive for all. That is, you know, a key driver. If everybody has access to a park, all of the benefits that we just discussed become part of their world. Communication and partnership. So communication, I'll just explain. It's communication in the sense of transparency. It's a communication in the sense of what the goal is and what the strategy is and how we communicate that to the public. And the partnership is equally important because a lot of times municipalities can't do it on their own. So there's often opportunities for partnership, whether it's volunteer groups like field naturalist clubs or horticultural societies or whatever that may be. But those are really a a strategic goal that you want to cultivate that. In the communication element, if you go on Talk to Berg right now and look at what's being proposed for Warren Mickle Park, great communication plan there, and nice to see that that has come through in that sense. Health and wellness is a strategic goal. Sustainability. Sustainability is a funny word. I think it's probably one of the most abused words in the environmental world. But sustainability really does matter. Highly manicured parks, botanical parks, they take a lot of effort. They take a lot of money. They take a lot of resources. And they're sustainable because you fund them that way. In Amherstburg, we have parks, large parks, where we cut grass, and that is it. Ranta Memorial Park, they're cutting 11 acres of grass with one play unit in it. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because there's a number of drivers that eventually make no contribution either to natural habitat, to environment, or just to social well-being. Park diversity is a goal. So park diversity is not only diversity of species potentially, if you can do that within a park, but also the diversity of parks. I mean, to have really, a high quality botanical park, and then you have a park that is a high quality sports recreation park. You have varying parks and varying elements in parks that make the whole system diverse, or you might want to visit. And one of the park diversity elements that we discovered was to theme a park. So the Bodwin Park, for example, the Bodwin Park example was kind of a tree house kind of theme element when that play unit went in, and with little islands, and it made it a little bit more diverse than perhaps another park that has some other kind of theme. Connectivity is huge. As a matter of fact, connectivity is probably one of the biggest drivers in park design and park thinking right now. The ability to walk, cycle, rollerblade on a linear park system, whether it's a greenway trail or whether it's some sort of connecting roadway trail, is absolutely huge. It's a major driver in park design, and have not only connectivity through the park or within the park, but able to connect to other elements in the community is huge. Safety, from a strategic standpoint, there's all kinds of consultation out there. Community safety through design is one of them. Obviously, the efficiency, which goes a little bit to sustainability, right? If we can reduce the cost of maintaining a park because we've got smarter about its design, then that works. And the park experience as well. Next slide, please, Corey. So lesson 4, wants and needs. Well, wants and needs really is a function of the plans that we develop and we vet through the public, and we vet through stakeholders, and we vet through community partners. That is really where the wants and needs come from. In the current town of Amherstburg's Parks Master Plan definitely has wants and needs. It identifies, through recommendations, those things that the public in its review, in its comment period, have stated. We just recently went through the Libro secondary plan, and very much had what I felt was a very robust intake from the public, and very robust from stakeholder groups. So here's just a few basics. The World Health Organization standard for green space for healthy communities is 1.5 hectares per 1,000 people. The Canadian national standard is 2.79, and a standard that you'll often see in municipal official plans, that have areas of high urban density, is about 4 hectares per 1,000 people. So Amherstburg has 6.2 hectares per 1,000 people. So one of the wants is actually not a need for more park space. Not that park space is evenly distributed, not that there isn't a need to continuously look at the prospect of park space, but we certainly have ample park space. And that 6.2 hectares actually doesn't include the natural park complexes and the provincially significant wetlands and areas like that. So that literally is park footprint within the town. Next slide, please, Corey. So a few of the basics. This is what we get very often when we petition the public. We ask for comment. Playground units. So the big play units, the play structures. There's always a want for more. There's always a want for an improvement. Amherstburg is in a tough situation. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that is a big driver in parks, there's no doubt. They are expensive. They, if you are a municipality that is averse to risk, they are fraught with risk. They have to be inspected often and by a qualified individual. They certainly are an infrastructure and an asset that needs to be managed. Washrooms. We get asked about washrooms all the time. Washrooms being open, washrooms being functional. How come there aren't more washrooms? Washrooms are a big issue. I mean, people come to a park, you're planning on spending a period of time, and the need and use of washrooms is always on the wants and needs list. There's no doubt about it. Lighting, we're often challenged about lighting. Parks tend to be poorly lit. And with more lighting comes more security. With more lighting comes sometimes less ambiance. But lighting is always on top of the list. Safety and security sort of goes part and parcel with lighting. Trash and recycling receptacles. Again, with limited resources and staff doing the best they can, you often have or can have receptacles overflowing or receptacles not being in the right location. So the constant movement and parade of barrels, park to park and end to end, is certainly an ongoing challenge. Shade structures, more and more, especially when you're dealing with temperatures that we are dealing with in the Great Lakes region, and shade structures now really are becoming an almost must in any kind of park design and development. Connectivity and accessibility of multi-use trails. This has really become, again, a very big driver, and not just trails that are passable, but paved trails, smooth paved trails for scooters and rollerbladers, bicyclists, novice bikers, kids just learning to ride their bikes. And that was a big driver as well at Bodwin Park. Beautification, flowers and trees. The botanical parks are popular, and we certainly know that from our own Kings Navy Yard Park. Benches and sitting areas is very high on the demand list, on the wants list. More and more so, dog parks and off-leash parks. Amherstburg does not have a dog park currently. In one or location has been proposed, and but it doesn't seem to matter where you turn around. I actually had talked to a number of colleagues over the last couple of weeks in preparing this presentation, and one of the biggest drivers is dog parks. People, again, we become a dog-centric society. So you're out walking the dog for the benefit of the dog, ultimately getting the benefit for yourself. But we are also humanizing, and you want your dog to be able to run free, right? You want your dog to be able to socialize with other dogs. So dog parks are actually something that I have a hard time getting my head around. It's probably my own lifestyle, but that's a big driver. Green space for non-organized sports. The Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee actually had began a discussion or began a motion that we would find opportunities at the Libro that they could, a group of kids who want to play a pickup game of soccer could come in a field that isn't being used, could be used. Just a place to kick a ball around. It's got to be mowed, it's got to be turf. It doesn't have to be lined, doesn't have to be netted. Kids play on turf fields all the time, but that seems to be a fairly basic need now. Sports courts, pickleball is expanding. It seems like every community around us is certainly dealing with the fact that there's a greater and greater demand for pickleball in hard paved sports courts. Drinking fountains, potable water goes right along with washrooms almost. Food concessions, kiosks along the waterfront were certainly something that we've heard repeated many times. Splash pad and pool. This all goes back to the Libro secondary plan and is a hot topic. And I don't have and have not really successfully found any kind of formula. Here we've got hectares per 1,000 people. I would think in a warming climate, in pools requiring a skill set, you should be able to swim or must be able to swim to use a pool. Where new Canadians, and very often from a lot of different ethnicities, don't swim, haven't had access to water, where a splash pad is cooling and gives you sort of a water recreation element. And I would imagine at some point we're going to see some sort of formula where, per 1,000 people, you would have, X number of nozzles or cooling stations in a community. A basic is maintenance, more maintenance, cleaner. Of course, we've had this COVID reaction, and certainly one that it pleases me. We hear a lot about it, and you often don't see a lot of action for it, because naturalizing areas and parks, there's a huge opportunity to naturalize parks, reduce your mowing footprint. Again, creating green space, cooling space, dealing with urban heat island effect, making it a naturalized area that you can access, a little trail through it, and people can enjoy. The problem that we often encounter with this is that it's kind of a not in my backyard thing. People still worry about mosquitoes and ticks. And there are strategies. I actually worked for a park superintendent in the Halton Region Conservation Authority. And he equated naturalizing park space and park area to a golf course, that you have a manicured area, you have the fairway. And you don't go immediately from fairway to hardcore naturalization. You have the rough. And the rough is what you maintain maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and then you are in the no-mow zone. You're in a naturalized space. This is a concept that's kind of being rolled out for Warren Mickle. Will be a concept that I think is going to be rolled out for Ranta. Huge opportunity. We're talking acres, potentially acres and acres of naturalization opportunity, and to build that tree inventory. A park tree is a lot different. Park grade tree is a lot different than a street grade tree, because if the tree falls, it's often not there's nothing in the fall zone, or nothing potentially permanently in the fall zone. So a huge opportunity, and I think educating residents and educating people on the value of naturalization. And again, when naturalization can actually benefit a number of species that we're currently pretty concerned about. Adding trees as well, not naturalization, but adding trees, more trees for shade, specifically designing shade corridors. Shade corridors in our streetscape, shade corridors in linear connectivity, and in a sense of a park network. But trees are really an important element of the park environment, and seem to be one of the few basics. We know that there's a huge basic want for access to Detroit River, whether it's for fishing, it's for kayaking, it's for getting your feet wet. We have very limited access, and that's pretty much a basic. And then the last but not least here is the barbecues and the grills and the picnic areas, and the fact that, again, open fire and the risks of all these things have to be somewhat addressed. But again, it is one of those basic needs. Next slide, please, Corey. So lesson 5 is just very quickly design. And if you're going to build or renovate a park, we should at least have minimum design features. The problem is when you don't have money, what you end up with is basically plunking something in a park that then doesn't have any other feature around it for a very long time. Pat Thrasher, Briar Ridge, Jack Purdy, even for that matter. I mean, it's got 2 play units in it. Jack Purdy did have features in the past, and will have very hopefully features again. But in some of the really basics that we see in park design now, pretty much across our region, is just as we discussed, shade structures. You got to have a place to get out of the sun. You got to have a place that if the kids are on the play unit or they're out in the grass playing, that you can be in the shade, and they can eventually be in the shade. So, and that includes trees, seating, a gathering place, a walking path, a trail, or loop trail or connected trail is also really a great park element, not only for walking the dog on, or walking your elderly parents on, or teaching a kid how to rollerblade or ride a bike. But even a lot of these trails have defined linear distances, so that you know if you've lapped the park 5 times, you've walked 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers or whatever the case may be. A central feature in the park, it doesn't necessarily have to be a play unit, but a central feature in a park, like a play unit or public art, botanical feature, picnic area, even the shade structure, gazebo can be a central feature, enough to attract people to the park for its enjoyment. Unstructured play area or turf area, again, it's important. It costs very little. You potentially have the ability to reduce your mowing footprint and concentrate on one area, providing a greater standard of care for that one area. Naturalizing as much of the surplus space in the park as you possibly can from an urban cooling standpoint, in a climate change resilience standpoint. And some of the basic elements: install a bike rack, trash cans, and recycle receptacles. These become pretty important, right? Especially in our little neighborhood community parks. Next slide, please. So lesson 6 is Amherstburg situation. So the historic commitment to parks, park development and maintenance is twofold in Amherstburg. Amherstburg is actually sort of right on the average in a lot of senses, in the sense of operating, but has a fairly dismal capital record. So from 2010 to 2016, the operating budget for Amherstburg parks ranged from $67,000 to about $1 million. And the total operating budget for the town in the same period was $23 million to about $27 million. That's operating budget, total operating budget. In that same period of time, so from 2010 to 2016, there was no capital budget assigned to park development, other than a $10,000 annual that went to the Coan Park as a partnership agreement with the town of Essex. So there was absolutely, and as far as I know, 2010 and 2011, the capital record, it was a little difficult to discern. There may have been a vehicle purchase, from a park standpoint or something like that. But for the most part, there was no capital spent on park development. There was no money spent on asset management. From 2017 to 2021, the operating budget for parks, it varied slightly, but it is pretty much held steady. It's been about 1.1 million. In 2016, it was 826,000. And then this past year, it's up to about 1.3 million. So previous councils and current councils, they did complement or did supplement the park staff. They hired or allowed 3 part-time positions to be included, permanent part-time positions, which certainly helps with the maintenance of the parks. The town operating budget in that period, though, had jumped from 24 million, or ranged from 24 million to about 34 million. And the capital spending in parks in 2017 was $150,000. In 2018, it was $160,000, and that was all vehicles. That was trucks and in a more, I believe. 2019, it was 215,000, of which 178,000 was Bodwin Park. So that was a fairly substantial pickup from a capital standpoint. But of that, there was $12,000 for a dump truck or dump box, a dump trailer, I'm sorry, and $25,000 for fencing repair. And then in 2020, it was $308,000. And again, the total in that period of time that actually went to park development was $178,000. And much of that was the restoration of Bodwin Park. Next slide, please. So from a community comparative standpoint, Amherstburg isn't a great deal different than Essex and LaSalle. Leamington is a bit ahead of the game. LaSalle is a little bit ahead of the game. Essex and Kingsville were pretty much on. When it actually comes to the discretionary budget that council has, they're all about the same. Even the city of Windsor, it's about 22%. Smaller municipalities, 20, 19%. But Amherstburg ranks the lowest in capital expenditure over the past 11 years with a total of 833,000, of which 528,000 was dedicated to park land improvement. So this is essentially the problem. So when you have failing play units and they get inspected by a third party inspector, every 2 to 3 years, and year over year, they say that the unit is past its useful life expectancy. And you have to question, I would think, as the public. I know council certainly made the comment, and you have to question as an administrator, I mean, how does it get to this point? Well, if you haven't invested any capital in basically 11 years, these things have a useful life expectancy and they disappear. You begin to need to have to remove them. So I think going forward, in a positive note, where we look at, about an $845,000, was added to land improvement since 2016. Much of that actually went to non-park improvement related expenses, which are necessary in a municipality. The library parking lot came out of that, some tank removals, there was other elements. But the Amherstburg capital budget for parks for 2021 is actually 820,000. Now 170,000 of that was in a bequeathment fund. So Amherstburg council's decision, in council's discretionary decision, it's actually about $710,000, which is twice the value committed from the previous 5 years, which I think is pretty good news. And these are expenditure developments like building out Kings Navy Yard Park, in the sense of the old Duffy Street, getting at least making it look like a park and getting us some access to the water. Warren Mickle, Ranta. There's a number of park projects here that are badly needed and are overdue, and I think this is making it look good. But there's not enough financial resource allocated to parks to get things done quickly in Amherstburg. And our elected decision makers, 3 I know who are listening now, and I applaud you for your indulgence, but there doesn't seem to be a grasp on the economy and the cost of park development. And it leads us to making things happen, literally in people's backyard. The real pitfall is that we get into replacing play units, and it's a single play unit in a park without any other amenity. And even though it's important to that neighborhood, it might be important to that little residential group, the thing of it is, it's never going to catch up. We're constantly, the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But you've got to do that strategically, and we've got to do that so that we're getting the best bang for our buck, getting the best bang for our park dollar. Next slide, please. So what do we got to watch for? And I think as a Thrive group, and I hope, in the 36 minutes or so I've been talking, I hope that we have educated people enough on the benefits of parks, some of the strategic goals, looking at some of the design things, so we gotta start watching for some of these elements. And I think it's important for us to help champion. So there's no decision on the Libro secondary plan yet. And as a main, that site as a main driver of cost, also a main driver for opportunity and economy, this plan needs to be approved. And I think a strategic development for a long-term funding plan. The resources should go into parks that potentially are a big part of your economy. Kings Navy Yard Park is a big part of our economy. Toddy Jones Park is a big part of our regional success, in our residential success. These are areas that really should be concentrating. We should be concentrating on. We had a lot of comment. We had a lot of feedback on the secondary plan, and there are so many facets to it that are really great. The nature trail concept, trailhead, and ultimately a larger trail network, and how that eventually becomes, the connectivity that might be a complete street development down Simcoe. Those are key drivers, and those are things that I think have to be looked at. The failing parks infrastructure, particularly play units, there's got to be a long-term capital asset management review done on this. The replacement in the failure of this is due to long-term capital deficit. There just was no money put into it. So now to scramble and try to find elements one way or the other. But there's also an opportunity, I think, to look at partnerships. Amherstburg Community Foundation certainly was a big part of the success of Bodwin, and there are other avenues like this. And you've got somebody in the director's office right now who is familiar with this. She did the asset management stuff for the playground units, dozens and dozens of units that came out during my tenure, and the strategy to begin returning them. To promote economy, lifestyle, and community opportunities. And one of them is, I'm speaking specifically of open air. It was painful for me to see the watering down of open air based on comment. There is such an opportunity to bring the parkscape out into the street. You could almost feel a groundswell. I mean, with very little infrastructure, very little cost to shade the streets, planters, warming stations, to extend season, all these kinds of things. But you could see Kings Navy Yard migrating out into the urban core, into the downtown core. My thought also is that you have a huge opportunity, and not to commercialize Kings Navy Yard Park, but that vibe of the downtown core evolves and spreads into Kings Navy Yard. The boundaries blur the boundaries. The boundaries become blurred, and you have this enormous opportunity. I don't understand what business wouldn't want to be in a space where you literally have 100 people an hour, upwards of 1,000 people an hour, constantly moving through your domain, your front door. And the last is certainly best and most practical use of existing park space. Warren Mickle, it was funny because there was a lot of rumor and innuendo. We were going to sell Mickle, and why don't we sell it for housing, and then it would pay for a play unit. But I think when you look at, if you go to Talk to Berg and you look at Mickle, it's going to be an enormously beneficial, both environmentally, residentially, and all within the confines of a very small park footprint. Ranta as well, Purdy Park. People got on board right away with Save Purdy Park. As far as I knew, or as far as in my tenure, Purdy Park was never on the chopping block. It wasn't to save it. It was to find the best and most practical use for the park. And if some of that meant, housing space, or some of it meant, other development, so that you could put in skate park, you could put in community gardens, you could put in shade structures, you could put in sports courts, you could put in new playground units. It's valuable, and it needs to be looked at in that context. And the same with Centennial Park, and how Centennial Park, the former Centennial Park, again, the opportunities, on Richmond and Victoria, and Friar, and how it relates to the 320 Richmond hub, and a park corridor, anchored by a community hub at one end and high school at the other end, I think is enormous. There are dozens more, I'm sure, things to watch for. And we certainly will be making comment and doing the best we can to positively encourage some of this, through the public consultation processes that are coming up, for all of these spaces. And last, I just, in case you don't get National Geographic, this month's issue of National Geographic is about beating the heat. And great articles in here, not only on the demographics, neighborhoods that are treed and shaded and cooler have less crime, have less violence, also become slightly more expensive and affluent. Neighborhoods that don't, the division between, the rich and the poor is now being equated somewhat to coming down to climate, in where you live and the comfort that you're in. So great article there if you get a chance to look at it. So that is it for me. I thank you for your indulgence, and I hope this crash course was gave you a little insight into what all of our obligations are.
Well, Phil, it's Richard Beck. Well done. And, I loved how you mapped out all of the benefits and the key aspects, but it's also important to always look at the numbers. I have an expression that great communities cost money, and it's very clear the great parks cost money. So I applaud council for the amount of money that increased for this year. One of the things Thrive will be doing is a white paper on parks and giving council our point of view. And we'll take a crack at spending too. It's nice to have Phil on our Thrive team because actually that's his file, parks, and he's probably the most capable of all 12 of the people on the committee, the directors, because he's got specific, really solid, specific experience and expertise in parks. So, we're ready to throw this out for questions. As you're thinking about them, Corey's there, and another naturalist doing the tech work tonight. If you want to put your hand up, we can do that. I can ask questions to get the ball rolling, but I'd prefer others hear from him. So, Corey, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so we've got, there's a question from Lyndon Crane. Lyndon, you can go ahead and unmute.
Great, thanks, Corey, and thank you, Phil, for the really interesting presentation, really informative, and I enjoyed listening. I wanted to get your thoughts on using parks to mitigate flooding. And obviously with climate change, temperatures rising and more rain coming down in our region, some of the parks in Amherstburg, perhaps they're leading to basement flooding in areas. I'm thinking of Crown Ridge and the Monopoly. Recently, the Tranby Park in Windsor is using an interesting design to basically percolate the water from the rain into the ground instead of into the sewer system. So what are your thoughts on opportunities for Amherstburg? Obviously, if we have capital available, to use parks as a way to help prevent flooding?
Well, it's a great question. Thank you, Lynn. I actually am 100% for any utilization that you can for a park or a green space. So from a climate change standpoint, and that's a great thing about parks. Parks have so many demands in the sense of what they're capable of providing a community with. Green space, cooling, and now, basically stormwater retention, or to slow stormwater retention. Great story on this is Memorial Park in Windsor. Memorial Park has a full drainage system underneath it. And when they chose basically to shut the moors off and naturalize the interior, all of the drains were restricted down to 2 inches. And then we foolishly built a dog park in it, and it was soaking wet. And there's a big demand to open the drains up, to drain that park, because the park was always soggy. If we'd opened the drains up, though, everybody's basement in the area of that park would have filled with water. And when that realization was made, you're realizing that that park is doing so much more for you than just a place to recreate with your dog or to take the trail hike. So I'm very much in favor, any aspect, socially, communally, engineering wise, it's what parks do for us. And I think should be looked at as needed and as we can.
Okay, Corey, another one?
Yeah, we've got a question from John Purdy in the chat. We're all aware of the aging demographic. The Parks Master Plan identified the need for fitness in the parks as an initiative to service this growing sector. As of yet, nothing has been done to address this need. Can we not draw on partnerships to service this need, similar to what happened with the John McGivney Park?
Well, first of all, my apologies for misspelling Purdy. I've got fat fingers, so I'm going to blame a typing error here. No, it's a great question. Amherstburg does have a very high aging demographic, highest in the region, and there's been a lot of work done with certainly linear park elements and outdoor exercise equipment. And I think there probably are opportunities. The issue that I've encountered, and it's something that as a municipality, we may specifically need to get our head around, is that anytime you build something like outdoor equipment, things to get people active, then it comes with a risk. So play units, for example, you have to put on these enormous rubber bases. The rubber bases cost what the play units cost, so that a head drop, a kid's not going to break an arm, or if they do break an arm, it's only breaking an arm and not, being seriously injured. And you have to do the same thing for anything that you put outside. But there are other elements to getting our aging population engaged. The fact is, in this town, we don't have any outside checker tables. We don't have, we don't have in our parks a spot where a senior could walk to, right, to meet up with, a friend to be engaged in out of doors. So these are really things that, again, should go on the mandatory sort of, if you're going to build a park out, build it with a number of minimum design features. And I think, John, it's a good point, and that would be one of them. We need to engage that.
Okay, Corey?
Great. Yeah, if anybody else has a question, you can raise your hand in Teams, or sorry, in Zoom. There's a button that has a little hand, but there is a comment here in the chat. You can also add your question to the chat as well. Here's a comment from Sarah. I agree 100% that the Libro Master Plan needs to be approved. It is shameful that we own such a massive property, a beautiful arena, and so much potential, yet the plan sits on hold. Then we need to plan for long-term funding for that parkland, as noted.
Phil, before you answer that one, it strikes me, I'd be interested in why you think it hasn't been approved. And I'm not an expert in this, and I observe it from a distance, but it seems that decision, there's so many parks that it's like a puzzle, and they can't be all things to all people. So it would seem to me that if Libro was approved, it kind of unlocks a bunch of pieces. And, we certainly do have good parks per capita. Maybe it's just more of the role of those parks. Thoughts?
Well, the consolidation of sports fields and the consolidation of things that demand a lot of attention, a lot of maintenance, actually goes to the efficiency and to the sustainability of your park network. So instead of a parks crew going from one end of Amherstburg to the other to float a baseball diamond, right? You consolidate that effort, and then your level of service and your quality of experience goes up. So that really is one of the big goals, right? Consolidate these things. But this property is unique in the sense that it's also on the Big Creek Marsh Complex. It's a very big property with a lot of natural feature on it already. There is a toboggan hill there. It's not been used as a toboggan hill because it wasn't designed very well for a toboggan hill. So there are all kinds of components. There's all kinds of little pieces in this that bring it together. And when your stakeholder groups get a hold and they say, yes, this is it. So you don't have to do everything at once. Just because the plan is approved doesn't mean that everything's going to be done at once. And as a matter of fact, I was really looking forward to seeing the nature trail go in. And without funding, it doesn't go in. But I'm almost thinking that this is a nature trail that we could build with the community. We're not talking a high-end, high-tech trail. This is a woodlot trail, woodland trail. So, excuse me. So there'd be components of this, but I think the question that you're asking essentially is that I don't think the plan has been approved. And actually, if the plan has been approved, my apologies, but I mean, I just spoke with the CAO yesterday and the plan has not been approved. And it's not been approved, and it sort of flies to me in the face of all the work that went into getting comment, getting the public's buy-in, getting people to say, this is really what we want. And we would have put a nature trail in because we've got the funding, but without an approved plan. It to me has the issue. And I think it's one of the things that we really got to get tidied up so that we can really start looking at the economy and driving those parks that are the most needed, the biggest potentials, like Navy Yard, like Libro. You know, those are the big Gulf parks. They're the big users. They are what attract tourists. They're what potentially going to draw tourists, and we get that moving.
Okay, did I see another one there, Corey?
Yeah, there's another from Kelly Malash in the chat. Warren Mickle Park is actually only a wetland due to improper water maintenance. There has been significant flooding due to damming. The baseball diamond has not been used in 6+ years. There's a distinct and growing number of trees dying due to this flooding. How can this be rectified? Homes in this area are at risk of flooding as well.
Well, first of all, Warren Mickle is part of the Big Creek Marsh complex, and the 1 in 100 year floodplain extends well beyond Warren Mickle Park. Warren Mickle Park probably was a swamp wetland in before the development of the neighborhood. So I'm not sure I agree with that. The damming and the water control of the Big Creek Marsh is artificial. I certainly would agree with that. Barrier Beach, as you get down to Holiday Beach and you get to some of the other pump stations, where they're now diked, the Barrier Beach probably would have seen a far different fluctuation of water. So the water hydraulics and engineering, I'm not qualified to speak on, but Warren Mickle certainly has a great concept to be a swamp or cattail wetland park. So the idea right now, instead of it just sort of being a mushy, the old ball diamond there, is mainly underwater. The design concept that is being worked on is that you actually enhance that. You create more of a depression there, and you take the excavate and you build now upland areas. So the upland areas will support hydrophobic species or upland woody species, pollinators, plants for pollination. And then your low-lying areas are areas where you would plant trees like pin oak. Sycamore is a very, very fast-growing tree that loves a wet footprint. So that is sort of the goal, to enhance what is already sort of happening there and somewhat control water. Not that we're controlling it in the park, but now if the park green's better and the surrounding areas, the surrounding residents have some benefit from that, then we think overall there'll be a benefit in net drainage. And that is rather the goal. So it's sort of a restoration project on what was just an area that was mowed. So it shut the moors off and, enhance that wet footprint to be kind of meaningful. And then you put a little trail in it, a couple little boardwalk pieces, becomes an area that kids can go catch frogs and observe wildlife. It's actually, I see it also being directly next to that one arm of the Big Creek as potentially a pretty good hotspot for butterfly watching, dragonfly watching, in certainly fall migration, hummingbirds and the like.
So Phil, I've got a question for you. So one of the things Thrive's talked about is misinformation playbook. And that seemed to be in where a concept is put out there. It's not the truth, it's made up. And then people buy into it and it just percolates and percolates. And the park plans, a couple park plans are due to go to council. I know there'll be a public discussion about that and exposed to public. So what advice to the people listening now with, it seems like everyone was judging the plans before they saw it. So what advice do you give to the people when it's unveiled by council and they're asking for input? What advice do you give people to how they react to it?
Well, first of all, Richard, it is absolutely the rule that any park redevelopment or park development has to be publicly vetted. You have to have a consultation period. And you also have to vet it from an AODA standpoint. It has to go to your to our accessibility committee. That's required. That the AODA committee, it's a legislative requirement. So that happens before it goes to council. So really what your administration is doing is you put some concepts together. And you're right, the concepts often get judged as the gospel truth when it hasn't even gone to consultation yet. So my advice when people would call up, and Warren Mickle was one that I actually received a number of calls on, I would say to him, I hear exactly what you're saying. One of the elements was that, you know, we've got a park down the road, you know, so you've got sort of a park with the play unit and all that kind of stuff, and it's, you know, in relatively close distance. So that little community has that park, and then, so are we going to put another play structure up? And there was really some opposition to that, kids walking on the road and things like that. Well, those are meaningful comments, right? So I log them myself, but I tell people you have to comment. So right now on Talk the Berg is the public consultation piece, right? And when we did this with Bodwin, we had people go on the Berg and talk. We had people show up, you know, before COVID, right? We actually do a open house public consultation. You got to get involved. We had, I don't know, 100 people, I think, come to the public consultation for Libro secondary plan. And I think we ended up with 70 or 80 comments, you know, sort of through social media and online and in the Talk the Berg channel. That's terrific. The Parks Master Plan, my understanding, I wasn't with Amherstburg at the time, the Parks Master Plan, my understanding is that 3 people showed up. Well, that's a pretty big plan, right? The plan develops your wants and needs. So you got to get engaged. You got to get involved. And I think that'll be a big part of what we're going to do as Thrive. Get people to get involved in it. Make your comments. It won't be just the residents either. It has to be us as a community. You know, and I think strategically, you know, an ecotourism strategy for Amherstburg is an absolute must. And, you know, that potentially is going to be a component of that park, as well as some fun for kids and some recreating, swing sets and so on.
So Corey, before we move to closure here, do we have any outstanding ones that?
Yeah, we've got two people waiting here. So we've got John Purdy. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Corey. Phil,
Hi,
just
John.
a question, just kind of a question. So I applaud the town when they looked and purchased Duffy's as an extension to the Navy Yard. I thought that was a unique opportunity for them. But here's a unique perspective, and I'm sure we have enough people that were formerly with City Windsor can appreciate what I'm saying. I used to be the president of the International Freedom Festival, so I have a very unique view on the challenges of developing waterfront property, offering festivals and music. And as you can imagine, we had quite a few difficulties with the Freedom Festival in terms of running a program down there. So I understand what you're saying about investing in the parks that bring a potential benefit to the residents and or the stakeholders in the town. And I can see that one of the biggest places to benefit would be the development of the Navy Yard Park. So at the end of the day, my question is, I believe there could be a potential that a significant amount of the capital budget could be devoted to large properties, as you mentioned, such as this, Duffy's property, the Libro property, the Navy Yard. Is there a process to make sure that we still respect the need for capital improvements in residential parks while still targeting capital improvements in some of the larger parks? Thank you.
Yeah, John, it's a good question. And again, I would think that, again, from my perspective and in my experience, is that if you are limited in funds, and that was the whole point of starting this conversation, with the fact that so little of the budget that a municipality has, any municipality has, is discretionarily spent by decisions of council. So, and the demands are enormous, right? You've got demands all over the place. So strategically, what generates the biggest bang for the buck? And I think if you look at Kings Navy Yard Park, in the sense of not only enjoyed by our residents, but enjoyed by business owners, right? Who benefit from the residents, and enjoyed by business owners who are receiving tourists, right? We know a lot of the visitation to Kings Navy Yard, right, is people from out of town, whether it's the wintertime with river lights or some of the other festivals, the Uncommon Fest and things like that. So I think strategically, it is harder to develop a residential neighborhood park because you end up really nickeling and diming it. That's was kind of the point. There's nothing tougher to look at for me than this great big fancy play unit on a rubber base at Pat Thrasher Park with not a single tree around it, right? There's never been the funding, there's never been the capital available to make that a nice park. Now, there's potentially some good things going to happen for Pat Thrasher Park if we incorporate the whole of the subdivision and we work with the developer and we develop a trail network and some natural spaces and things like that. It becomes an element within kind of the bigger element. So it's a tough question, and I think it's a good question, and certainly a question that I'm kind of glad, I guess now that I'm retired, that I don't have to really answer. My goal is to see something that we know could be spectacular. It's a bit of a blank slate, and to go back to open air, the more you do on the waterfront, the more you blur the line between park in that urban core, and you continue to develop that, it is going to be the coolest place, literally and figuratively, for people in this region to visit. And that's my guts and would be my goal.
Coolest place, literally and figuratively. That's compelling. Is there one last question there, Corey?
Yeah, from Karen. You can go ahead and unmute. Karen Alexander.
Hi, everyone. More of a comment than a question. I guess I've been listening to this whole presentation, which was really fantastic and really eye-opening on the world of parks management in a municipality. I guess I just have knowledge of a township up in Georgian Bay, the township of Tiny, and they have what's called a community engagement branch to their recreation department. And with one staff person and a really well-structured volunteer program, they've been able to do a tremendous amount of positive community work. Things like dog parks, beach maintenance programs, community gardens. They've done pollinator gardens in their public parks. And I just think maybe it might be something to look at for this white paper that is going to be prepared for council.
So Karen, there's a nice segue there. Please join Thrive because we're creating at least 9 white papers, and we want the input of Thrive members to contribute to that. So please go online and consider joining us. And Phil, anything you want to add to that specific idea?
No, it's absolutely terrific, and the joy that I have had over the years of working with the likes of the Amherstburg, Fort Malden Amherstburg Horticultural Society, right? Or, so many groups want to be involved and want to be engaged. And it's not easy to do. It actually, there's no such thing as a free volunteer. There's a lot of effort and time and care that goes into it. But I see myself being on the other side of that now. I'm looking forward to helping build community garden behind 320 Richmond. I got my cordless drills all charged up. I'm ready to rock. And I think that it's an excellent point, Karen. And I think you mentioned dog park. I really do envision a dog park, and a good dog park, not the crappy ones I built in Windsor, but a good dog park that is going to be a big part of a community effort and supported and maintained and and treated by the community. They seem to want it bad enough. And again, with sponsorship and who knows where this all goes. So No, it's a terrific comment, and it's something I think we will definitely want to continue to be part of a mantra of Thrive for sure.
So Phil, thank you very much. You know, right from the start, Thrive had some disciplines that we were going to follow. We would only recommend things that were evidence-based, that were mindful of best practices, and you've heard Phil's knowledge of best practices today, and believe in the science. And science has come up time and time again in his presentation. You know, the whole indigenous issues is front and center right now, but boy, the temperature, climate change is another. And so believing in the science. And the final thing is positive. You know, that's the attitude we're taking constantly. So Phil, thank you very much for that. You know, just a little bit of marketing here. This is, what did I say? This is our fifth Zoom. We have 3 others confirmed right now that we welcome you to sign up. And you can always go on our webpage for a lot of things, see upcoming events, check out our news section. Our news section is really fresh and updated. There were a number of articles put on it today from all around the world that we can learn from, we can adapt. So our speakers coming up is on July 13 is Jason Thorne. He's a chief planner in Hamilton. He spoke in the community a couple of years ago to a huge crowd. Really an excellent speaker. Hamilton might be a lot bigger than us. It's 400,000 people, but he's doing some very cool things. And he talked about what things, he has a number of ideas of what Amherstburg could do. What we're asking Jason to do on the 13th is to critique our 9 initiatives. Tell us what he thinks of what we picked out, what's good about them, what could be better. Then on July 25th, one of the things we talk about, the umbrella for all of our 9 initiatives is something called placemaking. And that's a foreign term to a lot of people. So we're bringing in an expert from the United States, Jim Tischler, who's worked, and his expertise is placemaking. So you'll learn about that. And then on August 24th, I'm really pleased that Ken Greenberg, the author of Walking Home, is going to speak. And Ken's a friend of mine. He said, okay, Richard, what was it why do you like that book? And it is one of the books that if you join Thrive, you can pick out. I really encourage you to read that book. And I'm going to talk to Ken saying, you know, I like this, but you'll get a chance to ask questions. He'll be there like Jason will be, like Jim will be, to answer your questions. So we've got good ones signed up, coming up, and we'll no doubt have more. So thank you very much for everyone for coming on today. The questions were great, Phil. Outstanding job. And we'll see you all on July 13th. So thank you very much.
Good night.